Welcome, 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 friends. I'm TK, your tour guide to the past, and you are listening to For the Love of History, the podcast where we talk about world history, women's history, weird history, and today, food history. I am so excited that we have a guest today, Claudia Hanna, culinary tour guide, faculty at the University of Virginia and James Madison, and host of the upcoming, when this podcast comes out, it will already be out, but the host of If This Food Could Talk. Welcome, Claudia. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Taya, for having me.
Of course. Thank you. I'm so excited. You had me hooked at history of olive oil because we love weird history here, and nothing weirder than a little bit of food history. So I'm so excited to have you on today. But before we get into the history of olive oil, could you tell me how you got into being a culinary tour guide? I have never heard of that job position before.
I'm so lucky. I think I'm probably the luckiest person, maybe, or I just kind of fell into it, quite truthfully. So I actually have an MBA in corporate finance. It is
wow.
Totally different. It is totally different. Worked in corporate finance for a few years out of grad school. Hated my job. Turned out I'm not very good with Excel spreadsheets. Kind of should have thought about that before going to grad school. And then ended up, my husband at the time, we fell pregnant with our first child. My husband's from Cyprus. It's an island in the Mediterranean. And we fell pregnant with our first child, and then we were still chained to a desk and all of that. And then I quickly fell pregnant with a second child. So my husband said, do you want to go and spend so Cyprus was becoming part of the European Union, and it was just growing by leaps and bounds. He said, do you want to go back to Cyprus for a few years? Just for a couple of years until Ella goes to school, is what we kept saying for ourselves.
Air quotes.
Air quotes. I've got the air quotes up, guys. And then we ended up going to Cyprus. I had a 2-year-old in one arm and a 6-month-old or a 4-month-old in the next arm. And it was just supposed to be for 2 to 3 years. And we ended up staying longer. And I would write, it was pre-Facebook, and it was it was kind of like a long time ago. But I would send these emails back to friends, and they were like, what are you doing on the island? How did you retire at age 30? And I'm like, I'm not retired. It's life. We're working out here. But I started to kind of like explain about how the Mediterranean lifestyle, how people lived out here. And a lot of my friends, and it kind of grew into this like organic email newsletter that got bigger and bigger. And when we moved back to the United States about 8 years ago, and I reached out to James Madison University, and I said, would you like to have some teaching? I'd love to teach some of your classes here. I've been getting a lot of people asking me about authentic Mediterranean cooking classes. They said, of course. And since I had that master's degree, they're like, come on in. And so I started to teach these Mediterranean cooking classes. Eat Like a Greek is what they were called. And I taught, how to make an original souvlaki, or how to make a spanakopita, or the importance of choosing a good olive oil. I know. And then it turned into, then the people who were asking me, who were taking my classes, were typically members of the community. So I taught little kids. I teach college students. I would teach graduate students. And then I eventually started to teach people who were part of the community, a little bit older, and wanted to cook, not just college kids. And they were like, you know what, Claudia, you keep talking to us about olive oil and yogurt and cheeses and whatever. Why don't you just take us there? I was like, you guys want to go? And they're like, of course we want to go. And so since I had spent a decade on the island, I had a lot of connections in Greece, Cyprus, Turkey. I'm of Egyptian origin, so I have a lot of contacts in Egypt as well as Israel. And so I've kind of got this Eastern Mediterranean, and I speak all those languages. I speak Arabic and Greek and Turkish and, all of that. And so I became this conduit in a weird way between the West to the East. So I bring people from one culture, and I give them a very authentic taste of the old world. And they get to live like a local, which turns out to be, they love it. And I'm like, awesome. So I get to keep coming back. I get to escape my children. I leave them at home, and I keep like taking tour groups and people who want to just travel and taste the Med.
Oh my gosh.
Kind of.
I want to travel and taste the Med.
I know. Well, come join me. Join me. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
That sounds so exciting. So, and then you started, getting more and more into the teaching part and the food part. And you obviously clearly have a love for olive oil.
I
So,
do.
at what point did you start, really studying olive oil and getting into the history of olive oil?
Well, so I am coming at this as a total foodie, and I
Yeah.
have to be very clear with that.
Hmm.
I have always so when I teach my classes at the universities, I teach it as like this is the origin of the food because I'm just interested, right?
Yeah.
I love history
Yeah.
and I like to feel connected to the
Hmm.
food item. So the show title is If This Food Could Talk, and
Yeah.
we view food as a vehicle to transport us back through time. So if
Hmm.
what would this food item, this meal have said to us? It has seen, and especially in the terms of olive oil, has it seen over the decades, the
Yeah.
centuries, the millennia, because it has been around for thousands of
Hmm.
years. Which empires has it gone through? Has it lived? I feel what we discovered was that, and I say we because I do have a production team, fortunately,
Hmm.
with If This Food Could Talk.
Yeah.
We are we really think of it as history on a plate. How did we
Love
bring
that.
Thank you. Yeah, but it's true. Like, we are connected to the past,
Hmm.
and when we use a vehicle that we all love, like
Yeah.
food, which is
Yes.
delicious, then we're connected to our roots.
Mhm.
And then what brought us to what how did it come to the United States? What brought it to the US? And so it became almost like because this is how I think of food and olive oil in particular, like
Mhm.
it is got this rich, rich history. Everything's got an origin. Who
Yeah,
decided to actually first start using that item as a food item?
yeah.
And then how did it travel? And so food has become, in my mind at least,
Mhm.
this great American immigrant story, because the
Yeah,
food immigrates, right? It
it
follows
does.
yeah, so, like, then what caused it? So and as a child of immigrants myself, I
Mhm.
really connect with food in that way. It's just kinda like, "What brought you over? What made" it's like, "Talk to me, buddy." And so
Yeah, yeah. We've got a similar story. That's
yeah.
amazing. Yeah, we here at For the Love of History, we love being connected to history. It's
Mhm.
very important to us here. So I think that you're the absolute perfect guest to tell us all about the origins of olive oil. So with that, it's a perfect segue. Can you tell us who started using olive oil? What are some of the first, you know, uses of olive oil?
Well, I have to say something, and I've got to caveat all this
Ooh,
because no
okay.
one knows exactly
Oh,
where and when the very first olive oil was mentioned,
okay.
and so there have been stories,
Mhm.
and so that's what we have right now, are oral stories, that the original olive tree came from what is now modern day Syria,
Oh.
and then immigrated and migrated, I should say. I've also heard that the oldest olive tree is actually in Bethlehem. To this day, it's about 5,000 years old.
Oh my god.
It is huge. It is huge. I've seen pictures. I've gotta send them to you.
Amazing. Yes,
Yes,
please.
yes, I'll be happy to. Where we focus a lot of our story because it has the largest written history
Mhm.
is in ancient Greece,
Okay.
specifically in Crete. We've got trees there that are considered monument trees, literally monumental trees.
Wow.
And to be considered a monument tree, they've got to be at least 3,000 years old.
Just a casual 3,000 years.
Just a casual 3,000 years old, and, like, they are so wide. You need to, like you stretch your arms around it, and it needs, like, about 3 to 4 people to circle the base of the tree
Wow.
just to kinda go around it. They don't
That's
get super high. It's not like
yeah.
they are, 200 feet in the air.
They're not like redwood trees high.
No, they are
Yeah.
absolutely not. They are because if you think about it, they are producing a fruit, and you
Mhm.
gotta reach the fruit.
Right?
And they are still these 3,000-year-old trees are still producing fruit that are harvested.
What?
I know.
That's
That's
so
some
cool.
that is some mama tree, if you think
That
about it.
is.
That is a
That is.
mama tree, right?
That
It's
tree
just
is
giving
mother.
and giving and giving and giving annually.
That is insane. So, okay, tell me about how these like olives were harvested and used back in the day,
Yeah.
3,000 years ago.
Well, so when we go back 3,000, 4,000 years ago, we're
Yeah.
in the Minoan civilization,
Okay.
okay? So that's not we're looking at the Minoan period in ancient Crete, where that
Okay.
is, okay? And we know that the tree was used. There's actually stories. There are stories, sorry, there are fossils, forgive me, fossils of olive pits and leaves that were in volcanic ash in Santorini that are at least 10,000 years old. That's
The
how old they are. It's been around for a long time. But
olive fossils.
when
I
we were
love
I know, there's, like, olive pit fossils. Um, but when we're talking about written history,
Mhm.
what we have access to is the oldest that we could discover were the
Mhm.
Minoan civilizations of ancient Crete in
Got
Greece. The ancient Cretans and the Minoans considered olives to be a sacred tree.
got it.
It was revered. And so one of the reasons it is revered is because they use every portion of the tree.
Oh.
It is you use the fruit, and we'll get into this, kind of like
Mhm.
how the tree was used, but nothing was wasted. So, what I could find out, what I could research was that the olive tree, there are wild trees and there are
Mhm.
domesticated trees.
Okay.
Okay? The domesticated trees, oftentimes there's gonna be a wild one growing from the earth indigenously in these
Mhm.
parts of the world in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they will take a branch from so I don't know who made the first domesticated tree. I will be
Yeah.
very honest, no one's got that. But they'll take a domesticated tree and graft it to a wild tree. And so that's how some of these ancient trees that are on people's lands to this day, they're just sitting in someone's backyard and they've got these multi-thousand-year-old tree. They've been grafted by somebody's ancestor and
Wow.
they just keep going. So we know that the Minoans revered the olive tree
Mhm.
because of what's written on pottery that we've been able to find. What was interesting, and this is a really cool story. So, ancient Egypt is not that far away, right?
Yeah.
It's like Egypt and Crete is probably several hundred miles away from one another. But for some reason on the African continent, or at least much of ancient Egypt, olive trees are not grown. They just
Oh.
don't grow indigenously.
Hmm.
Maybe I think they need a little bit cooler weather than what was there than in ancient Egypt. And the Nile produced a lot of water,
Yeah.
and the olive tree does not do well with water. It likes a drier climate. It definitely
Interesting.
likes a drier climate. And we'll talk about that in a little bit about, like,
Okay.
when why it requires a drier climate. So right around 300 BC, that's when Alexander the Great conquered ancient Egypt. We have Do you know what amphoras are, Taya?
Are they trees?
Amphoras, yeah, are no, they're like these clay potteries. They're these
Oh,
clay two-armed I'm holding my hands out.
yeah.
Um,
I'll
they're
insert a picture.
Thank you. Insert a picture of Claudia, like, holding these 2 but it's like a double-headed pottery,
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
They're made of clay, and there are ancient shipwrecks in the Eastern Mediterranean that has
Mhm.
been discovered that are en route from Rhodes, from Crete, and that they're on their way to Egypt, and whether it was through pirates
Mhm.
or through bad weather, no one really knows the reason that, the ship had wrecked.
Mhm.
But we found these olive pits. Olives had been there. There's wine, there's olives, and there are almonds that have all been found at the bottom of the Mediterranean in these ancient amphoras. They're on
Mhm.
their way down to ancient Egypt because Egypt had a lot of money, but it
Mhm.
didn't have as many resources. So it was buying its resources from ancient Greeks. And they would buy these huge amounts of olives. So one would assume, by today's standards, they liked to cook with these olives.
Yeah.
or eat them.
Yeah.
Turns out not the case.
What?
Seriously, they're not trying to press and eat them. You would have
What are they
actually
doing?
had them be pressed at the olive tree. You're not pressing. They're taking the actual raw olive and bringing it down. Why is that? Turns out ancient Egyptians figured out pretty early on that olive oil was a great way to mummify the ancient pharaohs.
What?
I know. Seriously. Seriously.
So cool.
I think so too. So one we think of oil and we think of like, okay, it is tastes delicious and it's
Yeah.
good for your health. But no, they're using it to press it and to have their loved ones be preserved till the end of time.
Wow,
Yeah,
that is so cool.
I know.
Every time I cook with some olive oil now, I'm just gonna be like, mummy juice, yay.
My
So gross. I'm sorry. Did I ruin olive
Mummy
oil for
juice.
somebody?
You know what? Maybe. No, actually you didn't, but that because I still love that stuff. But yeah, so the ancient Egyptians were using it to mummify their loved ones,
Oh
preserving the dead.
my gosh. Are there any other weird uses for olive oil that people have done throughout time?
Totally, totally. So, um, did you know that the Olympics, the ancient
Mhm,
Greek Olympics, so they have I don't know if you know this, but like
mhm.
sportsmen would showering was kind of hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Like there's not a lot of water over there,
Uh-huh.
but they got a lot of olives. So
Yeah.
they'd press the olive, they'd press the olives until it made a little bit of an oil, till it made a
Mhm.
lot of oil.
Yeah.
And then they would rub it on the oil on their skin
Mhm.
before and after a tournament. And before they would use it almost to like as you can imagine, like oil wrestlers, like
Yeah.
water wrestler, right? Right.
Yeah.
But instead of showering, they would take this special device, kind of like a thin comb,
Mhm.
and that's how they would scrape their bodies clean using
Oh
olive
my
oil and
gosh.
a certain device that would
Yeah.
scrape their body. It's like the best exfoliant. That's the way I
Yeah.
think of it. It's like an exfoliant. So
They
that's what they were
all
doing.
they all probably had amazing baby soft skin.
Baby soft skin that was
Oh
like
my
baking
goodness.
beautifully brown in the sun in the
Right?
Mediterranean sun, right?
Just goldeny delicious little wrestlers. Oh my
I
gosh.
know. This is what was weird. Did you guys know, and I certainly didn't know this till I started doing the research,
Mhm.
olive oil has a natural SPF. It's of 7, not a huge amount, but it's enough
Uh-huh.
to protect your body and your skin from the
Wow.
strong Mediterranean sun. But
What?
ancient Greeks, I'm not sure if they knew that it had this quality,
Uh-huh.
but it definitely protected their skin a bit while they were out running around.
Wow. Better
Yeah.
than SPF 0, I
It's
guess.
it's better than an SPF 0, exactly.
That is bananas. So you were saying that olive trees need a dry climate in order to do their thing and make olives. Why is that?
The tree itself is it's a long living tree. As I
Yeah.
told you, it's 1,000 years old. It's
Mhm.
thousands of years old for some of them.
Yeah.
It produces the reason it produces the fruit is well, it just produces a fruit.
Yeah.
However, the stronger what we've discovered is the higher the antioxidant levels
Mhm.
of the fruit, and we now know about the science and nutrition of olive oil, of course. But
Mhm.
the higher the antioxidant levels and antiphenol levels of the fruit, it's because of the ability for the tree to kind of starve itself. It's almost using it as a protection from being picked. It's like they're protecting the tree itself is trying to survive in these dry, hot
Yeah.
climates, okay? And so it's producing this fruit, and as a
Mhm.
form of method to, like, protect the tree as a self-defense mechanism, it
Mhm.
almost puts out these high phenolic properties that
Oh.
keep the olives very bitter tasting. So it's not a fruit that you want to just take and put in your mouth. I'm not sure if you've ever tried an olive that comes right off of a tree. It is extremely, extremely bitter. And so
Got it.
you're not gonna see a bird going and just plucking olives off of a tree and just eating it because it's not delicious. It is produced
Wow.
it's a very bitter tasting fruit. So the early uses of olives and olive oils were actually not for early consumption. They didn't really know what to do with the fruit in the beginning.
Mhm.
That's why they started to press the fruit. One
What?
of the other interesting things later we've discovered um, through research with the Roman Empire, so we're now
Mhm.
going forward a few hundreds of years,
Yeah.
um, and one of the early uses of the Roman Empire was to use olive oil to as a lighting fuel. It was literally for lamps, lamp oil.
What?
Yeah, they weren't because it was more delicious to cook with a rabbit fat or with a bird fat,
Mhm.
like a fowl or whatnot.
Yeah.
So it was more delicious for a lot of people. People weren't getting used to the taste of a bitter fruit. You
Yeah.
actually need olives to mellow out before they are consumed. So you have to actually let it sit for a little bit. We can
Yeah.
talk if you want about
Mhm.
process of producing and a table olive and olive oil.
Mhm.
But the early uses, it was actually the peasants in the Roman Empire who had to actually there were people who would sell cups and cups of olive oil on the streets of Naples,
Mm.
and they would sell it on the streets, like 1 cup for however many
Yeah.
whatever the money was at the
Yeah.
time. And it would the wealthy people and poor people would buy it to use it as fuel to light their lamps in their homes, okay? But it was only the really poor people who would say, "You know what? I'm gonna use it to light my lamps, and I'm gonna actually cook with it and some vegetables," because they were eating meat maybe once a year if they were
Wow.
lucky. So that was
Yeah.
the wealthy families are the ones who were trying to use it. They would turn their nose up at olive oil as part of food consumption. I
Oh
think
my
it's very
gosh, isn't that the way it goes though? It's
I
the
know.
usually the poor people who discover something delicious, and then the rich people are like, "Ooh,
Wait,
hold on.
wait.
Let me take this and make it
Eh,
incredibly expensive."
exactly, exactly.
Right?
Let's study it and talk about the polyphenol count.
Right. Exactly. So you were saying that the olives had to, like, sit and decay a little bit. So what is the process of making olive oil? How does that happen?
Okay. So there are there are a couple things, first of all. So
Mhm,
when your olives olive trees in the Northern Hemisphere, so think of the Mediterranean, California, in the Northern Hemisphere that have the
mhm,
Mediterranean climate, their harvest season is in the fall from middle of September through early November, okay?
mhm,
In the Southern Hemisphere, so in the s right now, we've got South African olive oil, we've got Africa South American olive oil, their harvest is in the early spring, okay, so April, May,
mhm,
just the seasons. So what happens is there are trees that oftentimes are designated, we're gonna keep this amount if you own some trees, you're gonna keep a certain amount as for table olives, and I'll
mhm.
explain how a table olive is made if you're
Okay.
interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're harvesting in October, for example, in the
Mhm.
Northern Hemisphere, and it's time to take your olives. You've gotta the process for picking an olive tree is actually a lot of work. It
Really?
takes it's really hard labor.
Wow.
And we've got some olive trees at our house in Cyprus, and I am telling you, it is a full-on family affair. You've gotta wear long pants because it's very dry. Remember I told you it doesn't
Yeah.
rain that very much. So you gotta wear boots, and you've gotta wear pants, and you've gotta wear gloves and long sleeve shirts because there are the olive tree itself is very straggly. The
Mhm,
brush underneath it is hard, and it hurts your toes. So you
mhm,
lay out these blankets or these large mats, and you take a rake, and it depends. Everybody's involved. So the children are
mhm.
on the lower levels of the kid. You make the kids go through labor, absolutely.
Love it.
Yes, yes, they gotta earn their keep, baby.
Right?
Right? But the kids are at the bottom levels of the branches, and they're picking the olives, and they just throw it to the floor, and then
Mhm,
you've usually got, like, the grandparents, so a little bit
mhm.
older at the middle levels of the tree, and then the younger, younger adults are
Mhm.
usually have the ladder up, and we're taking a rake and trying to rake the trees. That's how it's usually done. So this small little handheld a rake, and it's all being thrown to the bottom of underneath the tree.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, because you really can only it takes 24 hours. If you go any more than 24 hours, then you lose the quality of the olive oil. So if you
Oh,
think about it, an olive is a fresh fruit. I
yeah,
keep reminding people of that, especially in my classes. It is
yeah.
a fresh fruit. As soon as you pick it, it starts to decay. So
Right.
you gotta, like, take it, you've gotta and then you have to take it to the press within about 24 hours for its
Mhm.
optimal freshness. So you take it to the press, and it's nice to think about the 2 big stones being turned by a donkey in the ancient
Yeah.
days, and that is how it was done for the
Yeah.
love of history, I have to say. It was, like, very manual. 2 thick stones are being pressed, and that's where the juices are running out from underneath it, and
Mhm.
once they got smart, they started having a donkey press one of
Yeah, yeah.
the turns around it. But
Mhm.
nowadays, they've got, it's more mechanical, and it goes up
Mhm.
through this, like, little conveyor belt, and then it's pressed through in this machine, like, washed, and because there's, leaves and stones and branches are also
Yeah.
in that thing. So there's a little bit of a rinsing process. And then the olive that comes out and is extracted is actually quite green,
Oh.
liquid gold, according to Homer.
Mhm.
That is how much olive oil has meant throughout history.
Wow.
Homer would call it liquid gold because it was worth
Wow.
so much. And then once it's pressed, it's still rather bitter and green and murky looking. And
Mhm.
so it actually has to sit for about a month in these
Oh,
large containers for the sediment to drop to the bottom and then the olive oil to mellow a bit
okay.
before it becomes fit for consumption.
Wow. That
Yeah,
is so interesting.
a
I mean, I've
couple of
been
weeks at the
yeah,
minimum, a couple of weeks, but typically, right around a month.
so interesting. I've been eating olive oil my whole life and never really knew exactly how it was made. I thought it was just pressed and bottled and there zimzalabim, there you go. But
And now it's a
oh,
process. It is a
that's
lot of work too.
so interesting. Well, can you give us a few like insider tips on choosing the best olive oil? Maybe some, what's the difference between extra virgin and all of that other stuff?
Oh, absolutely. So this is something that I teach in my classes over and over again. So
Mhm.
I don't want people to there's a lot of mislabeling going on in the
Mhm.
market right now. So extra virgin olive oil means it's the very first press. When you
Okay.
say cold press extra virgin, that's kind of like over top. What happens is there's only so many olive trees in the world because that's where they can grow in these
Mhm.
Mediterranean climate, whether it's the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere. But we have a lot of people, and in the ancient times, it was like a couple of trees for a family, right? That
Mhm.
is typically what we use it for. Um, but now we have a whole lot of people all over the world hearing about the benefits of olive oil,
Mhm.
and there's still just not as many trees out there for all of the consumption. So
Wow.
what is a farmer to do? What is a producer to do?
Yeah.
Turns out what they've discovered is they do boil the olive in these large vats of hot
Mhm.
water, and what happens is, if you think again, it's always a fruit. It's got a little pit in the middle, and it's got skin around the outside. The
Mhm.
skin just expands, the flesh pulls away from the pit, and then you are able to extract more oil out of it. Okay? So
Oh.
that's what happens when they say it's an extra virgin olive oil.
Okay.
And then once it goes then when they go back into a second press, so then they keep, like, just repeating and pressing and
Yeah,
pressing. Let
yeah.
us think about that. That becomes a virgin olive oil. When they go again, then it's just no longer. Then they'll just say, "Look, it's light yellow," but it's not really even the good stuff anymore. Don't even bother with that stuff. Uh, so this is but this is the deal.
Mhm.
When you're cooking with olive oil, once you apply heat to olive oil, that
Mhm.
polyphenol count is being killed by the heat. Those enzymes are just killing it, right? The
Okay.
heat. So, what I tell people is when I'm topping a salad,
Mhm.
I get the expensive stuff. the cold pressed extra virgin olive oil, because the cold
Okay.
pressed stuff has never felt heat. I want
Mhm.
all that polyphenols. I want all the antioxidants in my
Mhm.
mouth. So if I'm topping a salad or topping, yeah, typically salad,
Bread or something, yeah.
yes, bread,
Mhm.
absolutely. That is exactly when I'm reaching for the cold pressed stuff. But if I'm gonna be cooking with olive oil, I might as well already have and not spend the money on the cold pressed stuff. That's when
Yeah.
I reach for the extra virgin or the virgin olive oil,
Mhm.
because that's then it just becomes kind of a lubricant for the pan, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. And it's already been the factory, the olive
Mhm.
oil press has already, through the heating process to extract extra olive oil, has already
Mhm.
removed some of that healthy antioxidant properties.
Oh.
So if you're gonna throw it on a pan, go for it. Don't use
Yeah.
the good stuff for that.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Noted. And then, so that's the process of the extracting, the difference between the extra virgin olive oil. And what is, in your opinion, the best kind of olive oil to have? Is there a place to get it from, or biases are totally fine? We are a little bit
Oh.
biased here.
Yeah, that is a hard one. I've had that asked to me so many times. Like, what's
Mhm.
the best olive oil to buy?
Yeah.
And really it comes down to like your taste. What do you
Mhm.
like?
Yeah.
I like the bitter flavor of a cold pressed extra virgin olive oil. There's
Yeah.
like a little joke, an insider joke for olive oil sommeliers. And when I do my olive oil tasting classes that I give, it's like the one cough, two cough. If you're like, take a shot of it, because you do,
Uh-huh.
you're supposed to smell it, you taste it, you cover it with your hand and then smell it. You have to heat it up a little bit. So you
Wow.
swirl a little bit of olive oil in a cup, and then you lift your hand, you bring the cup to your nose, and you take a good sniff. And then you try to see what are those memories? Does it taste like a
Uh-huh.
green apple? Does it taste like an almond? It typically takes the terroir of where it has been grown. Then you
Wow.
take a shot of the olive oil, and if you taste it and you do that
Uh-huh.
little cough,
Uh-huh.
then that cough usually indicates that there's a good high polyphenol count. So it really
Oh.
comes down to what your flavor you don't want it so spicy that you no longer enjoy the taste of it,
Mm,
and you don't
mhm.
want it too bland that
Mhm.
you don't even know if there's any olive oil in it, because there's unfortunately a lot of companies that they blend their oils, and
Oh.
unfortunately when it becomes a blended olive oil, you have no idea where it's coming from. So look for the singular cultivars, the single cultivars,
Okay.
and look for some cold pressed when you're doing your olive oils. And then my suggestion is always to taste and to try. I personally, in my house, I have 3 to 4 olive oils open at any time. And
Wow. Interesting.
here's
Yeah.
a little tip. Keep
Yeah.
it in the fridge. Keep it in the fridge.
Really?
Keep it in a wine fridge. Absolutely. Set at the red wine temperature, which is what, 40, 50 degrees, something like that.
I
Put
had
it in
no
the
idea.
fridge.
Thank you.
And then yes, you're welcome. And then when you're about to use it, take it out and just 5 to 10 minutes beforehand and let it get almost room temperature.
I'm writing this down right now.
Please write it down. Good. Good, good, good. That is my purpose
Wow.
that's my purpose. I wanted to share with you all that. But yeah, the olives and olive tree, it has been revered.
Mhm.
Did you know that you can't kill an olive tree? You can cut it down to its stump and that baby will keep on growing. So it does not die. That's why they're thousands of years old. It is
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, if you take the roots away, of course, but if you cut
Yeah.
it down and you trim it back because they need to be pruned, they
Mhm.
will keep growing. And that is probably one of the reasons that ancient Greeks have revered the
Yeah.
olive tree for so long. You use the leaves
Mhm.
to the leaves of the olive oil of the olive tree have been used for incense. I was about to say bukhori because that's what it is in Greek, but it's been incense in churches and religious rituals.
Wow.
Are you familiar with the term "the anointed one," like for
Yes.
the Messiah? Of course.
Mhm.
So we've been using olive oil, in religious ceremonies for thousands of years, anointing of and then therefore, when we say Messiah and the anointed one for Jesus
Mhm.
Christ, it was literally because he's been anointed with olive oil. It has been used for thousands of years for religious ceremonies as well.
That
It
is
is a
incredible.
sacred tree.
Yeah, that is amazing. I wonder if there was any, like, connections to immortality because the olive tree is seemingly indestructible,
It's
and then
indestructible. Mhm.
right? And
Amazing.
then this, golden liquid comes out of these gross, like, fruits that taste bad when you just eat
Terrible.
them, but it turns into this goldeny, delicious liquid, this oil
Right.
after pressing it. That is so interesting. I really, really wanna have a time machine and talk to people back then.
I I know. I know. Same, same.
Amazing. Well, before we talk about your upcoming podcast, is there any final little historical tidbits or factoids that you want to share with us about olive oil and their uses? If not, it's totally fine.
Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There's also the story of Athena and the olive
Mhm.
tree on the Acropolis. I'm not sure if you're kind of this one's more not this one's more of like Greek mythology. Do
Yeah,
you
we love mythology
Oh,
here.
do
We've
you?
had, yeah, a few mythology, I know, authors come on
Oh,
the podcast,
really?
so we're totally into mythology to tell late on us.
So there was a king, according to Greek myth, before Athens was named Athens, the
Mhm.
king wanted a city to have a patron deity. So two people stepped forward. It was Athena and Poseidon. So they
Mhm.
had to have a contest. Whichever deity could present the most useful gift to its people
Mhm.
could be, ground, could be the patron of the Acropolis, which is
Ooh.
the biggest city, of course, in
Mhm.
ancient worlds. So Poseidon presented his gift, which is the gift of the trident, and he
Mhm.
made a salt spring out of it. And Athena said, "I can top that," because she's an awesome ass woman, let's be
Yeah,
real.
she is.
And she presented her gift, which she pierced the ground with a spear, made a hole, and planted an olive tree. And of
Um,
course, the olive tree we know has many uses,
yeah.
from the leaves, from the fruit, from the oil, from the food, from the tree itself, making furniture. And so, because of this competition, the city went to be named after Athena because the olive
Mm.
tree, what she planted, was the gift that kept on giving to ancient
Oh my
Greece.
gosh. That is fantastic. Of course it was a goddess. Of
Oh, of
course
course
it
it
was.
was.
Who gave us this delicious, wonderful oil that everybody has loved for, like, thousands of years.
Totally.
Oh my gosh, Claudia, thank you so much. That was excellent.
I'm
A
so glad.
final
I'm
little olive oil tidbit. So, to, end our episode today, I would love for you to talk to us about your upcoming podcast. And when this episode comes out, it will be officially out for a few weeks. So go straight to Claudia's episodes right after you listen to this episode, please and thank you. So tell us all about If This Food Could Talk.
Yeah, so If This Food Could Talk was a brainchild, we I really think of food, and I've mentioned this to you. I
Mhm.
really think of food as a vehicle to transport us back in time. So If This Food Could Talk is a food history show. It
Love
is
it.
literally we're focused on food. How does this food take us back in time? And what has it seen? So, in the case of the olive tree, going back from the Minoan period, maybe even further back, what has it seen
Mhm.
over the civilizations? And then, how have we been able to bring it forward and use it in today's world? So, it's a kind of a food history show, but we also do a bit of cooking in the because I
Yeah.
teach cooking classes, so I gotta
Yeah.
gotta throw the like, all right, how do you use olive oil? How do you use like all that kind of stuff in a delicious recipe or two? So I think it's really cool because we have some great shows that we've already got. So the history of pizza and
Oh,
flatbread from the Persian Empire
yes.
forward. We've talked about and then we are so lucky because we're part of APT Podcast Studios. So
Mhm.
APT is American Public Television,
Mhm.
and American Public Television is the leading syndicate for PBS. So we've got all
Mhm.
these amazing PBS guests on our show as well. We've got the history of ice cream, like how it has transformed America. And I am talking from George and Martha Washington serving it at the executive office, and they do crazy stuff. They were like pranksters, and Dolly Madison and Thomas Jefferson, all these like people that we think of as like being really royal and
Stoic.
stoic statesmen and the founding
Yeah.
fathers, and they actually had great senses of humor,
Oh my gosh.
and they used to throw raging parties. So we talked about that, and I love that. And we have Samantha Brown, who is a travel host for the last
Mhm.
25 years in public media. She does Samantha Brown's best travel places.
Mhm.
She comes onto our show and talks to us about some of her favorite ice creams that she has tasted and seen in Singapore and
Oh.
Taiwan, and it's just so beautifully done. We've got on this olive oil episode, we have
Mhm.
my Greek table chef, Diane Kochilas, who shares
Ooh,
with us how she herself has an olive tree that's 500 years old in the back of her house, and
she's
how
fabulous.
she I know, because like, everybody does, right? And then she shares with us one of her favorite salad dressing recipes using
Ooh,
Greek olive oil and Greek honey.
yeah.
And so, yeah, we've got a lot of great, and Jacques Pepin is a guest on our show. Jacques Pepin has been cooking. He's got over 30 cookbooks. He's a
Wow.
French chef. He had television shows with Julia Child for over 20, 30
Oh,
years, and he's joining us on the show too. I'm so excited to meet him. I get to meet him when this show comes out. I'll have already met him, but I get to meet him
yay.
in a week. And we talked to him about his time as a chef, and then what are some of his favorite foods that he's been able to bring with him from France, his homeland in France, to the
Yeah.
modern world, so to America, and how he loves to keep teaching people. So yeah, we've got a lot of really salivating stories, a lot of really cool, you know, random stuff in history that I know
Yeah.
that you love and your
Oh,
guests
yes.
love in history. And we've got delicious recipes
Yeah.
to kind of throw on it because it's fun.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm so excited. I cannot wait for the first episode to come out. We
Thank you.
love weird history here. We love food history here. We love amazing guests, and I
Thank you.
cannot wait to hear you as the host of
Thank
this
you.
amazing show. So,
Yeah,
once again, Claudia's upcoming show, but it will be out when this airs,
absolutely.
is If This Food Could Talk. There will be links to her show and all of her social medias in the show notes. So please, please, please go check that all out. And with that, I will say thank you so much, Claudia. I really appreciate you taking the time to be a guest on For the Love of History.
It has been totally my pleasure. You are such a lovely human being. The biggest smile, always smiling. I just you've got such great energy. So thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me. It's
You
true.
are so welcome. Thank you.
Well, dear one, thank you so much for joining me and Claudia on this wonderful episode. I know so much more about olive oil, and you can learn more about food from all over the world and the history of it by tuning into Claudia's podcast, If This Food Could Talk. Thank you again for joining us and supporting For the Love of History. If you haven't already, please consider leaving a rating or a review. That really helps other history BFFs find the podcast through the algorithm. And if you'd like to support the podcast in other ways, you can head on over to YouTube for the Love of History podcast and subscribe there. It's free 99, and they really, really do help. And if you'd like some extra special history bonus content, you can join us over at patreon.com/For the Love of History. There is a link in the bio in the show notes. We do all sorts of fun bonus things there. And if you'd like to represent your History BFF Club membership or your delicious donutness, you can head on over to For the Love of History's merch store and get yourself a cute little mug or a t-shirt or a sweater or, a tank top, a bag. There are so many things. There's so many cool things going on over there. And with that, I will finish out this episode by telling you to do something kind for yourself. Treat yourself to a fun little snack or like a fancy drink or something like that. And make sure that you're drinking your water, please. And thank you very much. And I will see you next week for our second special guest of the season. Okay, love you, bye!
Why is there a metronome right now? Oh, okay.